Then there's corruption. When I started, I remember meeting Herman Kahn, famous thinking young thinkable guru before you were born, that he used to write works about this and the other. I bumped into him in a lift somewhere and asked him what he was working on. He said he was doing a study of graft and corruption. I said, what's the difference between graft and corruption? He looked at me and said, young man, because I then was a young man. It's taken us 6 months to realise that is the central question. I was rather flattered about this and said, what's the answer? And he said, graft is paying people to do what they ought to do anyway. Corruption is paying people to do what they ought not to do, or not paying them to do what they ought to do. And that's a useful distinction. And I'd rather assumed, from my own experience in that graft was normal everywhere. An underpaid civil servant in a country will expect you to hand over a few kwacha or something when you're having your road license renewed. You're entitled to have it renewed, but you have to pay a bit more because you've got to feed us out. It doesn't actually sort of stop the economy working. Deplorable, but so what? And I thought that was the main effect. There was probably a certain amount of grand larceny, particularly when people like Mobutu were around, but that wasn't very serious. I have to say, we had a meeting with John Gitonga, who's the former anti-corruption czar appointed by the new government in Kenya, but whose investigations ultimately revealed that corruption was continuing under the new regime and was getting increasingly, inquiries were getting increasingly close to the entourage of the president himself. I have a copy of the letter Gitonga wrote to the president, catalogues day by day his discoveries, his findings, hundreds of millions of dollars being expropriated, and the attempts to prevent him finding out, eventually threatening his life, and finally ending and saying, 24th of January, I went to London and then sent you this letter of resignation because his life was in danger. But he reckons something like 10% of the GDP of Kenya is effectively siphoned off through corruption. It's huge amounts. And you think that the aid contribution is something like 15-20% of the GDP. So it's a huge proportion, effectively, the aid budget. And it is the foreign exchange that is being siphoned off by this growing larceny. So something has to be done about it. What can be done? Well, a group which has led the way is the Global Fund. The Global Fund, which is set up to finance battle against AIDS, malaria and TB. Effectively say to any country, you want a project, come to us with the details of the project, we'll agree to finance it subject to it being properly audited and so on. They agreed to contribute to the health budget of Uganda, some huge sum. I'm not sure whether their contribution or the total budget was 43%, $43 million. But they put in auditing, and as they found that not much of this was filtering through to sick people, they began to ask questions. There's wonderful accounts of the response of the Ugandan ministers moaning at public bodies how difficult it is to work with the Global Fund. Other donors are so much easier. We discuss these matters and resolve it. But eventually the Global Fund discovered only 12 million of the 46 million that they were providing was getting through to health programs. When they cut off their aid, made such a big song and dance of it, Museveni had to sack 3 ministers, and they've been able to resume it. So where auditing takes place, it actually can have some dramatic effects. But 90% of the programs which the British government was providing direct budgets for, there's no auditing going on, and no feedback and no reporting back as to how the money's been spent. Now, in a lot of countries it will not be as bad as it was in Uganda in that program, or in Kenya in John Gitonga's experience. But it's better to have auditing. It makes it easier for the honest people to remain honest. And basically, people in most countries are just as honest, just as prone or not prone to corruption as anywhere else. And the other thing John Gitonga said is that when the money leaves Kenya, it comes to London. We are not immune. We are not non-participants in this business. it comes to London. And it comes to London for two reasons, basically, because if you've siphoned off a few £1 million from somewhere, London is quite a nice place to be. You don't want to be stuck in Basel. Or somewhere in the middle of nowhere. London is a great metropolis, but also it's got very sophisticated financial operators who will ensure that that flow of money is invisible. And they're able to do that by the fact that we do not require the beneficial owners of trusts and companies to reveal themselves. We think we should alter that and enable the source of funds to be visible. If someone buys a property in London, usually, well, it's pretty clear who it is, because he or she goes and visits it. But you can't prove it. It's hidden through the transaction service. So there's a task for the British government, through our law, to tighten up on these things. I probably said enough about the sort of directions in which we're thinking. Our conclusion, ultimately, I hope, and we won't reach any conclusions, publish our conclusions until the middle of next year, will be that yes, it is possible. It will be possible to make poverty history. That the next $1 trillion will not, we hope, be wasted. But it will require a different orientation from that which we've had in the past. Too often, people have wanted to feel good rather than do good. They wanted to feel the pain of giving money, or at least of making sure their compatriots gave lots of money through the tax system, without actually seeing, well, did that actually reach the poor people it was intended to help and reduce their poverty or enable them to create their prosperity. And all too often, and I found this way back 17 years ago when I was working on Asian development projects, there is a hidden patronising attitude in aid policy. And it's the presumption that we know best, not only that we know best, but that the people we are trying to help will sort of always need our help. In my experience, this is complete baloney. People I worked with in Africa and Asia had exactly the same capabilities as the rest of us. They have the same number of grey cells inside their heads as we do. They have the same desire to work hard and improve the lot of their families. They have the same capacity for enterprise and innovation and doing new things as anybody else. They start off in circumstances which are greatly disadvantaged. But ultimately it is them, it is the populations of developing countries who will create the wealth. We can expedite that process, we can help that process, we can create markets into which they can sell. We can help build up the infrastructure which will enable them to get to market. But it's going to be them who create the wealth and not us. And the joy of a successful aid policy will actually be that sooner rather than later it proves itself no longer necessary. And those countries will have moved from poverty to prosperity and generating that prosperity through their own efforts. That's the vision we have at the end of the day.